So, last weekend in college football, there was a bit of a controversial decision in terms of the 2 point conversion. So, UNC was playing Clemson. Clemson's ranked number one, or was at the time. They had a 7 point lead. UNC was knocking at the door. UNC got in for the touchdown. About minute 30 left in the game, and rather than kicking the extra point to tie the game, they elected to go for two, try to take the lead and win it in regulation. Uh, didn't work out. There are some reasons that going for two in that situation may have made sense for UNC, but we'll get back to that. That isn't actually the primary game I want to armchair coach today, because unlucky for me, I am an Oregon State Beaver fan. So I was watching the Oregon State Stanford game, and I thought there was a question of whether or not Oregon State should have gone for two in this situation, and I want to know what other people think. So our story starts with OSU trailing, unsurprisingly, about 7.5 minutes left in the game, trailing by 2 touchdowns. However, things are looking up. They were down by 21 just a few minutes ago, but they scored a touchdown, and now they're right on the goal line looking to score another touchdown. So they do. They score that second touchdown, make it an 8-point game. After they scored the touchdown, brought in the PAT unit, notched the extra point, and made it a 7-point game. However, I thought that the right decision would have been to go for two there. So here's my thinking. There's 7 minutes left in the game. You're still down a score. Odds are you're only going to get a chance to score one more time. So their most likely path to victory is they stop Stanford, they score a touchdown, and stop Stanford again, and then win in overtime. So if they fail to do any of those steps, they're almost certainly going to lose. Stanford's still in a great position despite the 2 unanswered touchdowns that Oregon State scored. So in my mind, I'm thinking, you go for two, you make it maybe 40-45% of the time, and then you make the stop, you score another touchdown, kick the extra point, and then you stop Stanford again and you win the ball game by 1. Or if 55% of the time you fail on the 2-point conversion, you stop Stanford, get the ball back, convert the 2-point conversion the second time, and then win in overtime. So let's put those two options on the whiteboard here. All right, so let's start out by running through our variables here. We have the odds of converting a 2-point conversion. Call that A. We have our odds of converting a PAT. We'll call that B. The odds of stopping Stanford the first time, call that C. And then we need the odds of the Beavers scoring that next touchdown, we'll call that D. Then we need the odds of the Beavers stopping them a second time, call that E. And then finally, we need the Beavers win percentage if the game goes into overtime. We'll call that F. So with option 1, we have the PAT option. So you need to convert the PAT You need to stop Stanford the first time, you need to score a touchdown, notch the PAT after that touchdown, stop Stanford again, and then win in overtime. Then we have option 2, where you go for it. So we have the odds of a 2-point conversion being successful, and then we have the same deal, odds of stopping Stanford the first time, odds of a Beaver touchdown, odds of a PAT after that touchdown, odds of stopping Stanford a second time, and no needs to win in overtime because they'll have already won. Or if the 2-point conversion is unsuccessful, they need to stop Stanford, score a touchdown, go for 2 and be successful, stop Stanford again, and then win in overtime. So since both options have stopping Stanford the first time, scoring the touchdown, stopping Stanford the second time, I'm going to say those cancel each other out. So we have our first option here. We have odds of a PAT conversion times the odds of a PAT conversion times the odds of winning in overtime. So 2 PAT conversions and an overtime win. Versus option 2, where we have the odds of converting the 2-point conversion, the odds of getting the PAT on the second one, plus the odds of failing to convert it, times the odds of converting it the second time around and winning in overtime. We'll also add in there the odds in option 1 if the PAT is failed to convert. They will still have the option to go for 2 on the second attempt to tie the game and potentially win in overtime. So, with my equations all set up, I went to the web looking for some data, see some averages for how often teams typically convert on 2-point conversions, how often they typically convert on PATs. And while I was looking for that, I stumbled across an article in the Sports Journal by J. Denby Starkey, and he basically was asking the same question. If team's down 2 touchdowns late in the game, should they go for 2 the first time? This article was from 14 years ago. So, beaten to the punch a little bit, but unfazed. So the first thing Starkey did was looked at how the numbers would add up with the NFL NCAA average of about 94% conversion rate on PATs and 43% conversion rate on 2-point conversions, and then assumed a reasonable 50% overtime win, and came up with these numbers. The third option he has there of going for 2 the second time after kicking the PAT the first time, I didn't even look into because that seems obviously not smart. But these numbers look promising. It looks very convincing to suggest that Oregon State should have gone for 2 that first time. So there are a few things I wanted to look at. One is that the odds of converting PATs have gone up in the 14 years since that article was written, and 2-point conversions have gone down since then. But on the aggregate, pretty similar, and some of his other stuff suggests it's still well within the range where he would suggest going for 2 the first time. So I looked at some of the other factors. One of the major ones is overtime. The initial assumption from that first graphic I showed was a 50% odds of winning in overtime. With the Clemson game that I brought up at the beginning of this video, UNC had a good reason to believe that they had well under a 50% chance of winning in overtime. Clemson is just the better team, and in extended overtime, the UNC coach felt that Clemson would get him most of the time and decided to roll the dice, try to a win in regulation. You thought those odds were better than the odds of winning in overtime, which understandable. You can kind of see that. Oregon State is a different story, though. So to justify the decision of kicking the extra point, Oregon State would have to assume that some combination of their extra point percentage and their winning in overtime would have to be higher than the league average, and or their 2-point conversion average would have to be significantly lower than the NCAA NFL average. I don't see any reason to believe that was the case, or at least any of those things were the case enough to justify the statistical advantage that just the basic averages would give you of giving yourself a better chance. There is another factor I think Starkey actually overlooked and was more relevant to the Oregon State game since there were 7 minutes left the time that first touchdown was scored. And that is the influence this choice has on the trailing team's ability to make that second stop. So what I'm getting at here is offenses play differently when they are playing in a tie game versus playing trailing by 1 point, at least in the final minutes of the game. The biggest piece of this is fourth down. So you picture a 4th and 3 on your own 40-yard line with a minute left in the game. If it's a tie game, probably going to punt that ball, because if you go for it and fail, then the other team is in great position to score a game-winning field goal in the final minute of the game. On the other hand, if you're trailing by a point, you're going to go for it on fourth down because you're already losing the game. There's no reason to punt because another field goal doesn't do anything for the other team. This makes it significantly more difficult to make a stop because you have to stop them 4 times rather than just 3 times. And that's just the biggest part of that difference. There's also what happens on third down. If, say, a team has a 3rd and long, if in a tie game, they'll probably make a conservative play to try to run some clock, try to stay in bounds. Versus if they're trailing, they're going to take 2 legitimate shots at getting that first down. Oregon State ended up making that first stop. They scored the touchdown, kicked the extra point to tie the game. But ultimately, they weren't able to make the second stop. And Stanford kicked a game-winning field goal, and that was that. I still think that Oregon State should have gone for 2 after that touchdown to make it 20-28. I think that would have given them the best chance to win the game. But it's just not a super significant difference. It's a question that I felt was deserving of analysis. And that's what I did. Let me know what you think. That's all. Thanks.